challenge because it's so extremely different from what we teach ourselves. I don't think I could have written cozy fantasy if I hadn't written epic fantasy first. Because what you're doing is you're unraveling the standard storytelling techniques. Because we're always taught to raise the stakes and ratchet up the tension, with the number one goal of keeping that reader turning pages. And the best way to do that is to get their pulse racing and to have their anxiety spike, which is the opposite of what you're trying to achieve with cozy fantasy.
What does it take to become a successful science fiction or fantasy writer? You're listening to the greatest podcast in the multiverse, the show that aims to provide you with writing tips, tricks, and inspiration for your author career by chatting with other successful science fiction and fantasy authors. I am your host, Herman Stuarnagel. I'm an author who is eager to learn more. I hope you'll join me in these conversations to learn and grow in your own writing, and maybe to find a new favorite book or author along the way. Ready to explore? Because on this show, every conversation is a doorway into a different world. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the greatest podcast in the multiverse. Just wanted to hop on and give a quick update before we head into today's interview with Sarah Beth Durst. I am really excited to have the New York Times Bestselling Author of the Spellshop, as well as 28 other books on the show this week. But I do want to give an update about the channel, because I'm changing a few things going into the last quarter of the year. Mainly just been reviewing my schedule and what I had wanted to accomplish this year with my writing, and realizing that I'm not quite where I want to be yet. This podcast takes a lot of time, and I'm happy to do it. I love being able to chat with authors and asking them questions and giving you writing advice. But it has taken up a lot of my time that I would otherwise use for writing. So I'm going to be stepping back a little bit this month, switching the podcast episodes to bi-weekly, at least until the end of 2024. But I've got some great guests lined up. So my ask of you is, if you haven't already, please head over to our YouTube channel, hit like on this episode and any other episodes that you've watched, and go and subscribe, because that really helps me know that you're getting value out of these conversations, and will help me kind of determine where things are going into 2025. Secondly, you may have noticed that over the past few weeks, I've kind of shifted the focus from pure just chatting with authors and talking about their books and promoting their books into trying to give some more writing advice, specifically around science fiction and fantasy writing. I think a large number of my authors are writers as well, and I want to provide value to you so that you'll tell your friends and that they will come and watch and listen to the podcast as well. That being said, if you're not a writer, if you're not looking to write, I'm still going to be talking about books. I have some amazing authors coming up in the next few months that I'm really excited to bring to you, as well as chat about the books that they've written. This week, like I said, is Sarah Beth Durst. Next episode, which will be 2 weeks from today, which is October 1st, the day of launch, will be Andrea Stewart, the author of The Bone Shard Daughter and her new book, The Gods Below. After that, I have MJ Kuhn, the co-host of the SFF Addicts podcast and author of Among Thieves. I've also got Andy Peliquin, Nicholas Ames, lots of great authors coming your way in the next few months. So just because I'm slowing down the release rate doesn't mean I am decreasing the quality of guests that are coming on the show. So I'm looking forward to what the next few months brings. Also, you may have noticed the last few weeks I've had some pretty more elaborate intros, trying to really up the level of production on the episodes, but those are time consuming. So I'm going to cut back on those. I'll give you a personal update, a bit of an intro to the episode if relevant, but I'm not going to be doing the clips and the stock videos and all that sort of thing that I've been doing the last few weeks. It's just too kind of time consuming right now. Yeah, so heading into the last few months, I'm gonna, just scale some of those things back a bit, but we're still gonna have some outstanding interviews. So thank you for being here, and thank you for sticking around. I hope you enjoyed today's interview. It's a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun with Sarah, and we had a great chat. So stick around and enjoy the interview. Well, hello, and welcome once again to the greatest podcast in the multiverse. Sarah, welcome here. I am so excited to chat with you today, and happy that you can make it out to speak with me.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, you're so welcome. And yeah, I'm really excited to talk with you. I've read the Spellshop. I absolutely loved it, and I can't wait
Yay.
to hear more about it and about what led to the creation of this cozy fantasy novel of yours. But first, I just want to give you a chance to kick us off. Tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and about your writing journey so far.
Absolutely. Hi, I am Sarah Beth Durst. I've been a writer for as long as I can remember. It's the only thing I've ever wanted to do, except when I was 5 and desperately wanted to be Wonder Woman, but that didn't work out. So, so I've been writing forever, and I've always thought of books as magic. And they're these little rectangles that have the power to transport us and take us on a journey and lodge themselves in our heart and change our minds and our hearts and our lives. And I just have always wanted to be a part of that magic. So
Yeah.
I've been writing since I was 10 years old when I started my first novel, which got about 50 pages in before I stalled out, and it was a cross between Wizard of Oz and G.I. Joe.
Oh,
And I kind of
wow.
went from there.
Very cool. Now, is there a particular book or anything that you can remember that kicked off your love of fantasy? Because you've written a lot in the fantasy genre.
I adore fantasy. So I'm talking to you now from my writing desk, and I have the camera facing my closet so that you don't see all of the books that are around me are pretty much all girl with sword, girl with talking wolf, girl with dragon, girl with talking cat, boy with prophecy.
Love it.
Very on theme for me. I've always loved books that are about the impossible and that have that feeling that when you close the book, the world is a little bit more wonderful than it was before, a little bit more magical, and that you are a little bit more magical than you were before. I've always
Yeah.
loved that. So yeah, and I've always loved, I still love the books that I read as a kid, Diana Wynne Jones and Tamara Pierce and Bruce Coville and David Eddings and
Nice.
Terry Brooks and Anne McCaffrey and Mercedes Lackey and Robin McKinley. All of them shape both who I am as a person and who I am as a writer.
Wonderful. Wonderful history of some great fantasy authors in there that have obviously shaped your body of work. Which is quite extensive. So now, I don't know if our listeners might not know, but do you have, what is it, 25 novels that you have published now?
The Spellshop is number 28, actually.
Wonderful.
Not that
Wonderful.
we're counting. I'm totally counting.
Well, you absolutely should, because that is an incredible body of work. Can you tell us, I guess, a little bit about the process of getting to the point of being published, and then kind of, I guess, the history of your publishing journey through all of that?
Yeah, it was pretty much writing a lot. So my journey, it's no deeper than that. I mean, as I said, I started really writing when I was 10. That's when I decided that I was going to be a writer.
Yeah.
10 years old, double digits, needed a plan for my future. Writing was it. And I've never wavered. I started writing, but I didn't finish a novel until after I graduated from college. I would start a beginning, get distracted by something shiny, the middle would be all murky and blah, blah, blah. I'd start a new thing.
Yeah.
And then after college, I finally finished my first novel-length manuscript and sent it out, all very excited, and it got roundly rejected and is in that closet behind me, as it should be. But it taught me that I could do it. And
For
it
sure.
showed
Yeah.
me what I needed to do to get there and that it could be done. And it did get easier after that. After you finish your first one, you know you can do it. And that belief in yourself is so essential to being a writer. So I entered sort of my rinse, lather, repeat stage, write a novel, send it out, get rejected, write another one, send it out, get rejected, until in 2007, my very first novel came out. And since then, I have published 28 books. About a third of them are for adults, a third of them are for YA, and a third of them are for middle grade, which is kids ages 8 to 12. So
Yeah.
most of them have things talking that shouldn't talk.
I love it. I love it. So, yeah, so you went through a long process of, it sounds like, writing and getting rejected. I guess a few questions from what you said there. I guess first, what was the difference between those novels that you never finished and the one that you finally did and were able to say, okay, now I've written a novel? What was the difference for you, I guess, your mindset in getting to the finishing line for that one?
It doesn't have to be perfect right away. I had to let go of that. Because when you first start writing, you want those words to match that lovely vision in your head of what this book is going to be and feel like and all the awesome things it's going to have. And then the second you start stringing words together, it is not perfect. So
Right.
You can glide along for a while on the joy of, oh, it'll be fine. But then you start getting around the middle point or 2/3 of the way through, and suddenly you've forgotten what verbs are. And it gets harder, and the amount of chocolate required to get you through those chapters has increased exponentially.
Right.
So it's pushing through it and knowing it's going to be okay and you'll get to the other side. And the first time you do it, you don't know you're going to get to the other side. But every time after that, you've been there, and it requires slightly less chocolate, except for some books which require a whole lot of chocolate.
Right. Yeah, that's great. And that really is true, because like the first book that I wrote, it was really similar, that you just need to learn that you are capable of doing it, right?
Yeah.
And then once you kind of get that first book finished, then you can do it, and the next one is easier. And most authors I talk to, their first book takes 1, 3, 5, 10 years, and then their next one takes 6 months, because they know they've gotten over that mental hurdle of being able to do it, right?
The mental hurdle is a big thing. I mean, a lot of what we're doing as writers is fighting with ourselves and getting ourselves to get out of the way so that the story can come out.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. Now, what is so you wrote that book, you wrote a few others that got rejected, and obviously you've written 28 novels since then. What is the motivation for you to keep writing? What is the why in your writing? Why have you had this lifelong desire to tell stories?
It's what I love to do. I can't imagine doing anything else with my life.
Yeah.
It makes me feel balanced. When I write, I feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. The world is in harmony and singing like Disney rabbits in the background. It feels right to write.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love it. And so what does that writing process look like for you? Are you an outliner? Are you a pantser? How do you kind of put together those works?
I always outline, and then I completely ignore my outline almost immediately. How about you?
Love it. For me, I'm very similar, actually. I try so hard to be an outliner. I really do, because I think it's going to save me a bunch of time if I can get some sort of story structure.
Should, right?
It does, right? Yeah. And then, but from what it works for me to outline probably the first quarter of the novel, just to get the base ideas down. And then after that, I really have to learn the characters and figure out who they are and what their motivations are. And an outline just doesn't do that for me.
Yeah.
So
same.
Yeah.
I like having the outline because it reassures me that what I have is story shaped.
Right.
And that it's got the rise and the fall and all of the beats that it's going to need to have. But then once I get into the voice of the characters, I prefer to trust them and have it be a discovery process, because that's the coolest thing when you're writing along and all of a sudden you realize your subconscious did something smart. It's delightful.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I was talking to somebody recently about that. I forget what somebody else I was interviewing, and they said the exact same thing. That you put in these little Easter eggs throughout that you don't even know what they're for, and then when you get to a certain point, your brain is like, "Oh, remember when I told you to put this in chapter 2? Yeah, right? That relates to now, right?" Yeah.
Then you're like prancing around your house and telling the cat, "I did something smart," and the cat doesn't care, but in your heart that it worked.
Absolutely. Yeah. So how then do your stories form? Then you say you have kind of a semblance of an outline that you ignore, but what kind of comes first in the process for you? Is it the characters? Is it the setting? Is it the magic system? How does that look for you?
It never comes as this huge lightning strike for me. I know it does for some authors, where they have this bolt of inspiration and suddenly they have this gorgeous full story idea that they just have to write, and they feel like the story is writing through their fingers. And I'm sure they're lovely people, but I don't like them very much, because that's not how it works for me.
Right.
For me, it's a little spark, just a little idea of, I want to write about talking lions, or like some just a little idea, and it'll sit there fizzling, and then I'll have a little spark idea. And when I have enough sparks, they stick together and they form a fire. And that's when I have the novel. It's very much growing ideas with me. And
Love that.
sometimes, I've written 28 books. You'd think I was just flooded with ideas all the time. But honestly, many of my books came about by me opening a Word document, typing at the top things I think are awesome, and then just listing a whole bunch of cool stuff, shoving 3 of them together and see if they make a story.
That is cool. That's really fun. I like that a lot.
I
And
love doing
you're the
that.
first person who I've ever talked to that has told me anything like that. you, I mean, I feel like usually as authors, the authors I speak with, they have far more ideas than they can ever hope to put down on paper. So it's pretty cool that, sometimes your idea, generation process looks a little bit differently.
Yeah, I trust that if I sit down and say, okay, I want to write something and I'm open to it, then an idea is gonna come. If I
Yeah.
force it and prod it and play with words enough, then it'll come out. I think
Yeah,
everybody has way more than one story in them. It's just a matter of finding it.
definitely. Yeah. And the process is obviously working for you.
Well, it helps that I love it. I mean, I think that
Mhm.
that's, you were asking earlier about, why do I write all these books? And for me, it really comes out of a place of joy. I love story.
Mm.
I think it's as important to human existence as food, water, shelter. It's how we understand who we are and what we've done, what we're going to do. It's how we exist. And being able to play with that is a privilege and a joy and so much fun. And if I can make a spider plant talk, it is a good day.
Yeah, and that definitely comes across in your writing, and I'm um, happy that you find the joy in doing it and putting the story together and putting these worlds together, because that is fun. And it's what you want your readers to experience as
Yeah.
well, right? Like if you're not enjoying it, then chances are your readers are going to have a tough time enjoying it too, right?
100%. Yeah, I
Yeah,
try when I'm writing to not think about the reader because that can be paralyzing if you're trying to please someone else, particularly a nebulous reader out there. So I
yeah,
try to make myself happy, to write things that add to the awesomeness of the world, if that makes sense?
yeah, definitely, definitely. I love it. So let's talk a little bit about your most recent book, The Spellshop, because there's definitely a lot of joy and a lot of fun in that book. Can you give us just a little bit of an overview about what the book is about?
Absolutely. Spell Shop is cozy fantasy. So it is very cozy, very cottage core. It's about a librarian named Keela who works at the Great Library of Elysium. She works with spell books. And then one day there's a revolution and the library begins to burn. So this is all chapter 1. This is not a spoiler. She gathers
Yeah.
up all of the books that she can grab. And then she, along with her library assistant and best friend, who is a sentient spider plant named Kaz, grab all the books and they flee. And the only place she can think of to go is her childhood home, which is on this remote and beautiful island where they establish a rather illegal spell shop that, as a front for it, also sells raspberry jam.
Yeah, it's such a fun idea, and I've absolutely loved the story. But I'm interested to know about, you talked about the spark of ideas that you get when you start writing a new story. What was the spark for this story?
This one was actually a little bit different because usually I
Okay.
start with some quirk of the magic or quirk of the world, like with the Bone Maker. It was actually, that was a coat with many pockets, and when she reached into a pocket, there was a bone, and that's where
Hmm.
that one became. It was a bone magic one. Queen of Ferenthia, which is an epic fantasy, was bloodthirsty nature spirits. That's all I started with. This one started just with a feeling. I
Okay.
wanted this book to feel, and when I wrote it, and when a reader read it, like they were getting a warm hug. I
Like,
wanted it to feel like sanctuary. Like you were sitting on your couch, you've got a blanket wrapped around you, a cat, preferably with wings, is on your lap, you've got hot chocolate, the snow is falling lightly, you've got this book. I wanted to create that feeling of peace. And
right.
so I built the story around around a vibe, really.
That's really cool. Now, was there kind of an inspiration or an impetus to get it, like that made you want to write a story with a cozy vibe to it?
Oh, yes. March 2020.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, the world kind of fell apart. And
Yeah.
so I started craving all these comfort reads. I went back and I reread, um, all of the Valdemar series by Mercedes Lackey. I reread Robin McKinley and Tamara Pierce, all those authors that I mentioned at the top of our conversation. And
Yeah.
then I picked up The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune.
Nice.
And I closed that book. Have you read that one?
I have read it. Yes, it's
Yeah, it's
wonderful.
such a wonderful, gentle story. And
Hmm.
I got to the end of it, I closed it, I'm like, I want to feel that more. So I went and found Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana and Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett. And these books that were just filled with kindness and empathy. And I said, I want to do this. So it wasn't that there was one particular trope or concept or character or anything that I wanted to do, but I wanted to recreate in me and in the reader the feeling that those books gave me, that feeling of everything's going to be okay. And here's
Yeah,
some
right.
magic.
Yeah, I love it. There's so I've talked to quite a number of cozy authors on the show in the last few months. It's amazing how many, like how cozy fantasy kind of as a genre is kind of like this recognizable term that we use now for cozy,
Mm-hmm.
um, came from COVID and came out of the pandemic. And, um, a number of those books, Travis Baldree, that's when he was writing
Yeah.
Legends and Lattes as well, and kind of the overflow of that we've seen in the last few years, really because people have wanted to feel good,
Yeah.
right? They wanted those feel good vibes because
What
the world um, has really been dark enough. I think is the
I
sense
think
that I've
that's
gotten at
I
least.
think that's exactly right. Yeah. I mean, I've been describing when people ask me what cozy fantasy is. Um, it's Lord of the Rings, except we don't leave the Shire. We just have second breakfast.
Right. That's so true. That is so true. Now someone needs to write that second breakfast.
Right?
What other so you've read a lot of cozy fantasy and you decided that you wanted to kind of create this world. How did the process then go from the cozy vibe into the story? Like what the process you said was different for you with this one. So how did the evolution of that look like for you?
It started with brainstorming things that give a feeling of delight.
Hmm.
Um, and one of the first things I wrote down was sentient succulent because I
I
really
love
like the
it.
alliteration. And that led into my sentient spider plant, Kaz. But I wrote other things down like books, spell books, magic, roses, raspberry jam, bread, cheese, like a lot of cheese, and quirky friends, like all found family, all things that make me feel warm and cozy when I encounter them in a story. And so I started weaving them together. Um, Writing cozy fantasy is actually it's a surprisingly tricky challenge that I really enjoyed. You might have guessed I really like writing, but I really enjoyed um, the challenge because it's so extremely different from what we teach ourselves, particularly as genre writers. I don't think I could have written cozy fantasy if I hadn't written epic fantasy first,
Oh,
because
really?
what you're doing is you're unraveling the standard storytelling techniques because we're always taught to raise the stakes and ratchet up the tension, keep
Yep.
with the number one goal of keeping that reader turning pages. And the best way to do that is to get their pulse racing and to have their anxiety spike as they want to know what happens to these characters, which is the opposite of what you're trying to achieve with cozy fantasy. You're
Yeah.
trying to give them a peaceful escape that wraps them in a hug where they know it's going to be fine. So, how do you keep the story, the narrative propelled forward while still creating that? So, you have to do
Mhm.
things like every time the tension is going to rise, you have to unravel it. You have to add humor or pause and live in the moment. There's a lot of sensory detail that you find in cozy fantasy. And the reason is it allows the reader to take that necessary breath, and it grounds the characters in the moment, which is also the way that you keep the narrative pushing forward, because instead of having the high stakes of saving the world, you've got low stakes on the outside, but there's very high emotional resonance, and you achieve that by grounding them in the present.
Okay. Yeah, and so as it's great. It's great. How did you? I guess, were there times where you had to stop yourself from going into those high stakes moments after writing,
oh my
epic
gosh,
and high stakes fantasy for
often.
so long?
Yeah. Yes, because my instinct is always, all right, let's save the world, join the revolution.
Right.
So I did have to constantly be like, no, that is not this story. This story is serving a different purpose. This story, we're not saving the world, we are saving a heart. And so I would have to find a different story, different way to tell this slice of life kind of story, which was pretty fascinating, because it's pretty easy for me to go, let's go save the world. But it is more challenging to be like, no, we're going to eat this cheese.
Yes, right. And to keep it, interesting enough, or I shouldn't say interesting enough, to keep it engaging enough for readers to continue turning the pages.
Yeah, it still needs to be compelling.
Yeah.
Compelling and cozy is the challenge of writing cozy fantasy.
Yeah. So you mentioned Kaz, and I definitely want to touch on Kaz, because he is, I think, I'm sure one of many readers' favorites, but he definitely was one of my favorite characters. I love that that it was your first thought like in the creation of this. So can you tell our listeners, I get as much as you are able to, a bit about Kaz, who he is, and really what his role in the story is?
Kaz is a sentient spider plant. One of those plants you see in offices all the time, with like lots of leaves and the little tendrils coming off. And as I mentioned, the first idea I had was sentient succulent, but I decided I wanted him to work in a library, and a cactus with all the pointy little needles was impractical for turning the pages of books. So he became a spider plant out of sheer practicality for turning pages in books. And Kaz, so he's like roughly the size of a farm dog, and he doesn't have any like facial features. He talks like his leaves rustle when he talks, and he moves around with his leaves and his tendrils. He's got root balls stuffed under him. He doesn't have a pot. He's a mobile plant. He's also very anxious and extremely loyal to his friend. He's like the perfect best friend in my, at least what I decided was the perfect best friend. I made a plant.
Right.
One of the most awesome things about having people read about Kaz is a number of people that have written to me and said they'd gone out and bought a plant and named it Kaz. I think that's amazing.
Nice. That is amazing. That's wonderful. I won't do that because it would die.
Yeah, I bought myself a Kaz, but I waited until like 2 months before pub day because I figured it would be super bad luck if I killed it off. But he's doing fine. He's doing great.
I'm glad to hear it. But that would be me. I have killed succulents before. I've killed everything. So plant-wise, I'm not a green thumb.
Yeah, people assume I'm good at gardening because I have lots of plants in this book, but no. Yeah. Fantasy is a lot about wish fulfillment. I wish I was good at gardening, and I am not.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about the world and the island that you've created, because there's a lot of fun stuff with the magic and the village itself that you can tell us without getting into spoiler territory.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, I want to tell you everything. Yeah, I will resist. So this is a world with magic, but the emperor who lives where the story starts out and gets tossed out a window and like sentenced to, he's been hoarding magic and having only like the elite sorcerers be allowed to use magic, which has had great ramifications, negative ramifications to the outer islands. And the further out from the capital, the bigger the ramifications, because these islands depend on magic to, grow their orchards, get their crops doing. Like, sorcerers used to come around and help with the mer horses. There are mer horses. Which makes me happy. The lead guy, the love interest, herds more horses for a living, as one does.
And they're so much fun as well. They really are.
Yep, they were a lot of fun to write. Half horse, half fish. And somebody actually found some kind of emoji that reversed, like it had the fish head and the horse feet, and it was hilarious looking. Mine are the other way around. Horse head, fish body. Very elegant. Yeah, so this island is suffering in many ways because it doesn't have the access to the magic, which is why Keela opens her illegal spell shop to help the island thrive. And she brings magic to the people. That's one of the themes of the book, is that magic belongs to everyone, which is something I really believe. Magic, whatever you want that to be a metaphor for, belongs to everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that, I mean, it's really interesting in this setting that obviously had magic taken away from it at some point, that you were able to bring that magic back and explore it in so many different fun ways, and at the same time allowing, your main character to explore who she is.
Mm-hmm.
And, so you've got both, external and internal, things happening. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about the relation between those two things.
Yeah, I mean, I think the internal story should match the external story when you're crafting a novel. So Keela, she's pretty introverted, like very introverted. The line that I wrote when I first figured out exactly who Keela was it wasn't that she didn't like people, it was only that she liked books more. When I wrote that line, I'm like, oh, I know who she is.
Right.
That's kind of the core of where she begins. She's been sequestered in this library. She really hasn't left or talked to anyone but her plant in like 11 years. So she's not really good at peopling, and she doesn't want to be. She has no interest in that, but she gets to this island and it occurs to her she needs to like not die. So to do that, she needs to go into town and form relationships with the people that live there so she can like not die. So it is about her learning to connect with others and to care about them. Not that she hates all people, but she doesn't have those kind of relationships. So she's building relationships that's very much found family. And at the same time, she's building when she's building the magic that's kind of within her, the magic of caring about other people, the magic of human connection. She's literally building magic back into this island at the same time.
Right. Yeah. I do think it's really fitting that, that her best friend was a plant. You made, you gave her the trait of not, enjoying interacting with people. And of course, she enjoys interacting with her best friend who's a plant. And so so, I mean, circling back to Cass just a little bit, because I had wanted to ask you this, what kind of advice can you give to writers who are looking to write an effective side character? Because I really think Kaz really connects to Kayla in a way that any other side character I don't think could. So can you just speak to, I guess, side characters as a whole, and how writers can develop effective ones?
Side characters need to feel just as real and as full, as complete as your main character. I mean, you can, if you want, do exercises where you see the scene through your side character's eyes, whatever it takes to make them as real. They're not there to serve as plot devices. I think people that start thinking of side characters as those cardboard cutouts of here's the best friend, here's the, whatever the stock character is that you wanted to fill in, like here's the comic relief. That's when you get into trouble. That's when it starts not feeling real and the story stops working. I think if you want an effective side character, they could have been the hero. If you just simply chosen to write it from their point of view, they should be that full a character, that full of life. And this holds true whether you're writing about humans or plants or rocks or dogs or whatever it is, because you're always writing about humans. You're always writing about the human condition in the end. It doesn't matter if they have leaves or feathers or fur or skin. And, you should build them just as honestly as you build your main character. I really enjoy writing dialogue. It's one of my favorite things. I will often in first drafts just have people babbling at each other for pages and pages. They won't like even be anywhere in setting. There'll be no plot advancement. They're just like talking about, mushrooms or whatever.
Right.
And sometimes I end up cutting like all of that. Sometimes I leave a little of it. But that banter is what I use to grow the characters and figure out who they are and how they interrelate. So I tend to develop characters that can have interesting conversations because that's where I begin. So I think Kaz and Keela playing off each other is a kind of natural outgrowth of my process and how I develop characters and story.
Right. Cool. Is there anything that you find difficult in character creation?
When they don't work. Some characters come really fast and you can find the voice really, really quickly. Like Kaz, I knew right away who Kaz was. From the second he swung himself on his leaves onto the screen, I knew his voice. Other characters, it's much more like an audition process where I will try out different personalities in the scene until finally I'm like, yes, you may stay. The rest of you go home. And sometimes it takes a while and you just have to be patient and trust that like if they're not working, they're going to evolve. And sometimes I've even like gone on and written hundreds of pages before I'm like, that's who that character really is. And that's fine because that's what revisions are for. Revisions are a beautiful thing, not to be feared, but to be embraced in their whole glorious splendor, because that's when it goes from terrible to good.
I love that. I love that a lot. Do you find that you spend a lot more time in revisions than you do in the drafting phase?
Oh gosh, yes, absolutely, 100%. Yeah. And if I can like get through that first drafting phase as quickly as possible, I am so happy. Because the first draft, I mean, you start with a vision, right, of what you want to achieve, and then you start writing it, and it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse until you finish the first draft. But then once you have that first draft, it can only get better. And then it's much more pleasant.
So what you've talked about this a bit already, but what kind of emotional impact do you hope, not just for the Spellshop, but in general, are you looking to get from your readers? What are you hoping to, what kind of impact are you hoping to have on them as they read your books?
Hope. I think that is true for absolutely every single book that I've written. The one thing I want a reader to feel is hope. Even in like the epic fantasies where like half the cast is dying, all the way to the cozy fantasies where everything is fine and you may have some raspberry jam. The thing I think that fantasy literature does pretty much better than any other kind of literature out there is that it's a literature of hope. It tells you that dragons can be defeated, that good can conquer, that love matters, that friendship matters. Now, granted, I am not talking about grimdark. That's another whole kettle of fish. I don't write grimdark. I admire it. I write optimistic fantasy. Even across all of the genres, I would definitely categorize what I do as optimistic fantasy. I like to hope that when a reader reads my book, they've been able to escape for a little while and then come back to their life feeling a little bit stronger than they were before.
I love that. I love that so much. And I love that you have a common thread that does run through, even though you're writing in multiple subgenres, that readers can know what to expect when they pick up one of your books.
Yeah, that's definitely, it is funny when you write a lot of books, you start discovering the things you're obsessed with. And that's a big one for me.
Nice. Yeah. And I imagine that once you've written that number of books, you see those themes that you gravitate to, and you're able to kind of pull those threads out that maybe you couldn't have in your, second or third book because you haven't had the time to, explore those ideas that you keep coming back to and those themes that you keep coming back to, right?
Yeah, that's 100% true. Because one of the other things I play with is different ways for a character, a person to be strong, what it means to be strong. And I think with Spellshop, the superpower in it is kindness. That is the strength in it, that if you find that kindness, that empathy for other people, that will get you the happily ever after.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and you definitely see that in the way that your main character and the love interest play off of each other and how that relationship develops, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I guess, and through all, and I mean, not just them, in them, throughout your other characters as well. That is a very strong theme in the story.
Yeah, it is the kindness matters. I really one of the things I wanted to do when I was creating this book that I decided very early on was that I wanted to portray healthy relationships, particularly the healthy romantic relationship. Um, Not to say they're not super awkward because they are super awkward with each other, but they're healthy. So it's a non-toxic relationship. It's awkward.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, you see a lot of toxic relationships in fantasy of late, I feel like.
Yes. Yes, you do. And that adds a lot of drama, a lot of angst, and it's a great storyline because you get to see these two people clashing. I didn't want to write that for this book.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't lend itself as well to a cozy story
Nope,
either.
not so much. It would not be a good story if they were all jerks. That would not be cozy.
Right. How funny. So, Sarah, can you tell our listeners what are you working on now? What can they expect from you next?
Yeah, I am working on my next cozy fantasy. It is going to
Ooh,
be set in the same world. It's not a sequel. Different librarian, different island, lots of talking plants. It's going to be called The Enchanted Greenhouse, and it will be out next July. And I'm extremely excited about it.
very exciting. Oh, I'm looking forward to that. So that's coming out, sorry, next July, you said?
Yes, in July, July 15th.
Wonderful. Well, we're very much looking forward to that.
Thank
uh,
you.
yeah. So, Sarah, this is the greatest podcast in the multiverse. It is time for our final question of the day. But can you tell us how a different decision might have shaped another version of your life in a parallel universe?
That is a wonderful question. I would hope I'd still be a writer. That would be super upsetting. I think another path I could have followed, but only in another universe, not in this one, is marine biologist because I
Oh,
absolutely adore dolphins and other
nice.
marine creatures. But I couldn't do it in this universe because I really hate being underwater and I don't like boats. So,
That yeah, that would be a hindrance to that for sure.
right. How about you? Have you answered that question on your podcast before?
I, I have a few times, and I always try to give a different answer.
Okay.
See if I can think of one real quick. Marine biologist would not be on the table. Um,
But you get to hang out with dolphins. I mean, dolphins.
yeah, that would be fun. I mean, water and me aren't friends either necessarily. I'm not. I can swim if I have to, but it's not my favorite place to be. Um, I think in a different universe, I would probably am a professor at a university. I think there's probably a version of me that decided to stay at university because I really did enjoy my time there. So I do have a Bachelor of Arts degree, and I didn't know what I was going to be when I grew up, even after getting my university degree. um, so the thought of continuing on with my education was definitely there. So that is something I could be doing.
I like that. That is good.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me, Sarah. This has been a blast. And can you just let our listeners where the best place to find you is?
Absolutely. My website is just my full name, www.sarahbeththurst.com. I keep it up to date with all my events. I have the first chapters of all of my books if you want to see what kind of reading mood you're in. I'm also on all social media at Sarah Beth Durst, primarily on Instagram these days, but I'm also on Facebook and TikTok and whatever Twitter is now, Threads and Blue Sky. So come find me. I'm always there.
Wonderful. I will link all of that in the show notes below. Thank you once again for joining me. This has been so much fun.
Thanks so much. I've loved this.